Do you want help
Yeah.
giving those out?
Thank you, I do. If you would give one to every individual, and we have some couples here, how many children do you have, like 11 and 12 and over? So I want you to have one so that your children can take them as well.
Oh, okay. So yeah, one for myself, and then my dog, one dog. We have one dog.
Oh, okay. Is your husband or his father?
Yeah, he's around.
Okay,
But
okay.
he's not-
So,
Yeah, so three's
I'm
good.
gonna give you 3 because he factors into it,
Yes,
okay?
okay, awesome.
So
I thought we were trying to conserve.
And 11 and up.
Yes. How many children do you have?
2.
11 and over? 2? And, one, okay. And you and
I just want one, thanks.
their mom?
You only want one?
So, okay, I'm gonna send you 3 for mom, dad, and your 11-year-old, okay? And it really is a lot. Now, you guys, y'all gonna, I'm just gonna give you a packet to take home. These people over here. I'm not having more.
That's what I had.
I didn't bring my scissors, and I should never go. Ah, smart.
Seventh grade or eighth grade? Eighth grade? Oh, wise, because see, yeah, that was 2 years ago I was with Ford. Yeah. He's a better painter.
These are old, this is the same thing. Remember this?
Yeah, better? Not better in taste, but not thick. Right, but he can't flew and stuff like that. Yes, the weight. The weight.
What do you have to do?
Likes to eat. Yeah, we can have one for Logan.
And little Jay.
Because it's not going to help him any. He's going back to his parents. So. I don't know. Let me have one more.
The more information.
Yeah. Thank you.
So 3, is that good?
Figure out how to do it.
So does everybody
He's going back
have
home.
what you need in the way of these? Okay.
So do we answer these on ourselves or answer these?
Yeah, let me tell you how it goes, okay? What you do is you're gonna, you answer for yourself, okay? Don't think a lot about it, just go with the first thing that comes to your mind. And so what you do first, you look at row 1, and it goes from left to right across the page. And of those 6 characteristics, which one sounds the most like you? And you put a 6 in that box, okay? Which set of characteristics sounds the next most like you? Put a 5. And so on, down to what sounds the least like you, and put a 1 in that box. So then you go down row by row for the 7 rows, and then you total them vertically, okay? You answer them horizontally across the page, total them vertically, and your highest number, and you may have 2 colors that are pretty high, but then you come over to this second, and I'll go over this next week. I want you to have kind of have it done. So then you bring your totals over to this next page, okay? And then you'll get, I've got kind of a PowerPoint that goes more into this, but you can begin to get an idea. In this circle, it gives you an idea of the characteristics of people with this kind of personality who responded similarly to you. Over here, you get some ideas about potential pitfalls that your particular personality style might encounter in a relationship. But what we're going to talk about next week is, so what if you are red married to a blue? What if you're green married to a yellow? What if you're green married to an orange? Or something like that, okay?
Oh, one more.
Sure. Then you need to right about your husband. Okay.
Right here.
Oh, okay, all righty.
We definitely have an extended family in my home.
Go right ahead. Yeah, I want, if you do well to have one for everybody, okay? Because here's what I learned. I am a certain color on that, and I'll talk more about that next week. But when I was raising that daughter of mine that I was talking about, what I realized with this was that, boy, there's a reason I couldn't read her. Because she's really different than me. She's wired much more like her dad than me. So if I was gonna relate to her and be able to connect with her, I had to get that. Because what I would tend to do is what all human beings tend to do. We tend to impute to others. We see them much more as we are rather than they are. So she would do certain things, say certain things, and I would think, wow, if I said or did that, this is what I would think. This is where I'd be coming from. I couldn't have been more off base with this child, okay? Because she just simply was not wired like me. My husband, he ain't wired like me, okay? So it's really, really helpful to get kind of how you're wired,
I know I'm
and
picky.
how your partner is wired, how your children are wired, and how to be respectful of who everybody is in that family mix. Okay, so that's but we'll go really more into that next week. But I just wanted you guys to have that so you can do that. Hopefully, let everybody sit down and do it. It takes 10 minutes to go through. So if you can do that. Let me talk just a little bit about the adolescent brain, because that we mentioned some of it, but it really is important. Again, it doesn't finish cooking, okay, growing until about 23 to 25 years of age. Males tend to get there later than females. Rapidly changing. 2 different times in life, birth and 12 years old, roughly 12 years old, by the time puberty kicks in. Massive amounts of neurons, okay, those things that make the nerves fire and are responsible for causing things to grow, your brain in its ability to do things. Massive neurons take place at birth and again at puberty, okay? Prior to puberty, we don't have a lot of norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine in the brain. But when the estrogen and the testosterone kick in, along with other things that happen in the body at puberty, and we get this massive growth of the neurons, it changes our brain. Teachers in here, when do you start to teach concepts like algebra, which would be critical thinking skills, non-concrete, what's the opposite of concrete? Abstract, thank you very much. Abstract concepts. When do you generally begin to teach those? In first grade? No, because kids are very black and white, concrete, all or nothing. Prior to that time, right about puberty, the brain changes tremendously, okay? So before puberty hits, they are much more teachable and moldable because of the way the brain is organized. Which helps us as parents, okay, when they're very young, to do a lot of guiding and structuring. And then we wonder what happened, who came in and stole our kid about the time puberty kicks in, okay? What happened to that little child that used to think I hung the moon? What happened to that little child who'd do most anything I asked him to do, basically, and didn't question me or think I was crazy or stupid? Well, what happened was the hormones and the neurotransmitters that start to come into play. But if those don't happen, they stay like children. They believe anything they're told, okay? They don't know to question. Where would we be if we believed everything we heard in today's world as adults? We don't want our kids to believe everything that they hear. We want them to be able to question and think critically and evaluate just how true could this be, okay, if somebody's telling me something. Especially if you listen to the news much of the time. So it's a necessary thing, but it's a huge change. But now you understand kind of what's going on there. By about the age of 6, about 90% of the brain is in place. What still has to keep growing is this prefrontal cortex here. And what happens after that second, at about 12 years old, that second dose of neural development that takes place, the brain begins, it's very efficient, okay? And it begins a use it or lose it kind of an attitude. If you practice piano, if you practice baseball, if you practice gymnastics, whatever, what you do, you get better at. What you don't do, you kind of tend to lose the ability to do it, okay? So that's a lot of what's going on there. But also, think of adolescence really as it's considered to be a neurologically traumatic crisis because there's so much change going on. Do you wonder why your teenagers tend to become so like narcissistic and self-involved and self-aware at that age? And it's like nobody else in the world exists or nobody else's needs or rights, you know, can supplant theirs. Well, it's because, have you ever bumped your elbow?
So that'd be 2.
And in that moment that you bump your elbow, it's pretty intense, isn't it?
1.
And in that moment that you're thinking, man, that hurt when I bumped my elbow, everything else you've been thinking kind of goes right out of your brain because you're concentrated on the pain right here. Well, with all those changes going on physiologically, and neurologically, and emotionally, okay, and intellectually, at a time when they're in an environment where everybody else is going through those changes, at a time when they're coming into that environment, like that slide, a few slides back, what do our kids face today? They face a lot of pressure, a lot of decisions, a lot of ways they can get into some really dangerous things, okay? At a time when the brain and the body is as vulnerable as it will ever be, okay? So that's why it's considered a neurologically traumatic crisis. But it's also in the most positive sense, because if they didn't go through that process, we would remain childlike in our ability to process information and relate to the world. Well, that would make us pretty vulnerable also. I wanted just to make sure that I had, again, dopamine continues to increase. Dopamine is right here in the neurotransmitter, in the prefrontal cortex. It is a neurotransmitter. But dopamine is that neurotransmitter that allows us to do constant triage during the day. How to prioritize, what to respond to first. How do we pay attention to this and not pay attention to that? Our teachers in here, you know ADD, you know what ADD is? I'm sure my teachers know. It's a deficiency of dopamine in the prefrontal cortex. That's why people who have it have difficulty deciding what to pay attention to and what isn't necessary to pay attention to. So they pay attention to everything and nothing else. Yes, ma'am.
And I know you keep saying that boys still develop later, but is it, I've heard it before that at around 15 or 16, the brain actually stops growing in that part for a boy. And so the decision part of it is not where they can think about the consequences, they only think about the now.
Right. Yeah. Now, it's not true that the prefrontal cortex stops growing. In fact, it doesn't complete its growth pattern until about 24, 25, especially in the young male, okay? But teenagers make decisions from a totally different part of their brain, okay? Teenagers make their decision mostly from the amygdala, which is a part of the brain that is very sensitive to emotion. It's where our emotions come from. So they make decisions. That's why there's so much drama in the teenage world, okay? And why their decisions are so emotionally driven. Adults tend to make decisions from the prefrontal cortex, which takes into account how might this affect other people, how might this play out down the road if I take this action. Not as much from an emotional place. But what can stop growth in the prefrontal cortex could be drug abuse, could be alcohol abuse, could be trauma, could be physical abuse, could be certain disorders, okay? And that could delay or impede or retard growth in the prefrontal cortex, okay? Yeah. It's a very good question, good comment. Any other questions?
Well, I guess
Yes.
my question is, I know, I'm assuming this first part is about how to understand the teenage brain and everything. I need help dealing with technology in my teenager.
Yes.
I need some suggestions, some strategies, because we're really, I think as parents, we're dealing with the first generation that is truly digital.
Yes.
And they're using iPads in school now, they're using cell phones. It wasn't like this ever before. You have a portable computer that used to fill the whole room in a skyscraper
Yes.
in your hand.
Yes.
And we don't know how to deal with this invasion. It's an invasion into our family.
It is.
And we need strategies. I know there's dopamine shortage and there's not an adult frontal cortex, but I really need some strategies.
If you can hang with me to the second part, we've got a lot of that.
Okay.
Okay, but yes, because this is called.
Just making the point here.
There you go. And it's a good point because it is called parenting in the digital age.
Yes.
Yeah, and we will get there. you can definitely get there, because it is a whole different ballgame today. You're right. You're
Pam,
right.
part of my question was very similar. Does Ross Campbell do any work that furthers his study on the eye contact issue? Because this last 10 years, these kids are focused right here with their neck down, and that is a total thing that they will not have. They will
Yeah.
not have this eye contact if we continue with this,
Yeah.
obsession right in front of our
They
face.
will, they'll text sitting next to each other.
Yeah.
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 You're right.
I went to pick my niece up from college, and her and her boyfriend went with us, and they were texting each other at the table, and we were talking, and I was like, we're right here, there's people, live people right in front of you,
Yeah.
and you're texting each other.
My daughter will,
Have a sign that says you're being rude and hold it up or something.
my daughter will send us, instant messages on Facebook from her bedroom
Yeah.
to me and her daddy, just
Yeah.
because she doesn't wanna get up and come in there.
Yeah.
No technology in the
Yeah.
bedroom.
Well, she has an iPod, yeah, we
Nothing.
corrected that.
Yeah.
Because it hasn't happened in a while, but that's why we took it away from her, because we're like, if you can't get up and come in here and communicate us, she was like, well, I don't want Daddy to hear, or I didn't want you to hear. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
well, then you
Yeah.
should come in here and said, I need to talk to you, and then we both go back in there together. So, yeah. It's,
And we're gonna talk about some rules around technology. Now, Ross Campbell hasn't done any more studies, because he retired long ago and is since deceased.
Yes.
But there are studies out there on how the digital age is rewiring. I mentioned earlier a friend who is a kindergarten teacher, and she says literally they're having to approach teaching reading in a different way, because kids' brains store information differently than they did in my generation when we didn't have exposure, okay? Now, we're not gonna do away with technology, and we don't need to do away with technology, because it's taken us along. There's a lot of things in life we have now that we didn't have, okay? And technology really is connecting the world in a way it's never been connected for good causes. But what we are going to have to do is recognize, and it's a sword that cuts both ways, and we're going to have some rules around it, okay? Because at any point in time, what the internet has done is open your home, and this is what you were referring to, and everybody was going like this, open your home to anybody who can hack into your computer system, okay? So knowing that, you're looking at this laptop or this iPad or whatever it is, or their smartphone, and you recognize that anybody can get to your kid. So what if there's a box here and anybody can come through that box and get to your kid? What kind of rules are you going to have about that, around that box in your house? You're going to have it be, it's got to be in, when you're using it, it needs to be in a commons area where there's, where other people are. There's no passwords that I don't have. There's no locks that I can't access. There are things called parental controls, and they're on all the computers, laptops. I don't know if anybody even has a tower anymore, but laptops, iPads, and I can take a look at what's on your iPad, your phone, your computer, anytime I want to, and I make sure I do it when you're least expecting it, just so you know that I do. Okay? I'm talking to them about, there are folks out there who troll. You ask them, do you know what a troller is? Do you know that there are folks out there who set up false accounts, who put pictures of themselves, because words don't come to me at this point. Nouns and names, that's what you lose when you get old, the ability to recall them. What is the process? Manti-teo. Fishing, thank you. That's simple enough, isn't it? Fishing. Do you know what fishing is? And do you know there are people out there that do that? And let me tell you what that looks like, okay? And here this guy was, quarterback, promising career as a football player, ended up looking like he didn't know anything, didn't have the sense to come into the lane, because he fell for this, and there's folks out here doing this. So we're having lots of dialogue, but it's important the way we have the dialogue. I don't want to sound like I'm condemning every piece of technology and progress out there, because that saves people's lives and it helps people in third world countries come out of such dire poverty. We've really reduced drastic poverty, dire poverty all over the world, and much of the reason or the way that's been done is through use of technology. So I want to sound like an educated person when I talk to my kids. So I want to say, you know, here's some wonderful things that we can do now that we couldn't do 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. But here's the other side of that sword, because it does cut both ways, and we've got to manage it responsibly. So I am going to be checking on controls, I'm going to be checking the cookies, and I'm going to be checking where you've been, and you need to know that. And everything gets unplugged at 10 o'clock at night, and it goes in my room. I don't care, really, even if you've got an A-plus kid who's never stepped out of line, that phone, if they're under 18, in my opinion, okay, maybe 17 because they're going to be going off to college, but at least under 17, the phone comes in my room at night, and it stays in there to charge overnight. Laptops, computers, all of that, because where do they get on the internet and get into so much trouble in the middle of the night when I'm sound asleep? So they've at least got to come in my room and get past me to get hold of it, okay? The iPhone contract that you had, and there's something else, I can't remember his name. You've got the iPhone contract, but there's another piece. It may be in what I'm bringing next time. Just some social media. Okay, do you have one of these? This may be what I was planning to give you next time, and I can't remember if I made it a copy yet. But it's got the positive aspects of social media, the negative aspects of social media, general rules for social media. Some things I made copies of to hand out tonight. You'll get a copy of this next week, okay? Okay? A lot of it we're kind of talking about now, but I will be glad to go over more of that. It talks about the gaming, the Snapchat, the Instagram, the texting, the FormSpring, the Twitter, the Facebook, all of that kind of stuff, and some ground rules to have. So we'll go, like I said, a little bit more into it. But let me hear other comments and questions, things you've run into, and I'll bring this next one. As far as technology.
I guess right now I'm lucky, I guess, because my son is so careless that he loses his phone all the time.
Yeah.
So he still has the flip up one that's not even connected to the internet because we won't let him have the internet connection yet.
Yeah.
So, but he's fixing to get into, he'll be 13 in November, so he's been asking, can we have your new phones can I have your phone when you upgrade?
Yeah.
And we're like, no, I'm not paying an extra $30 to get on the internet and get off and look at bad stuff, so.
Yeah.
But it's gonna come a day where he's gonna want that, but for right now, he's so careless with it, he don't even know where it is half the time, so.
Right. So you're right, you can kind of fall back and say, when you've gone a year or 9 months and not misplaced your phone, then we'll think about you having a more expensive phone. But I think parents, I think it's very legitimate, just because a kid turns 13 or 14, I don't think their first phone should be a smartphone. I hope nobody else thinks
Try
that.
10,
Try
8.
and they expect it to be a
Seven, they have
smartphone.
Kid needs an iPhone at 8 years old.
Yeah, yeah. Well, because I was in Birmingham where my granddaughter is, and my daughter and her husband, and I was playing with my granddaughter, who's 14 months old, and her little friend, who's 20 months old. And I was showing him a picture of Mickey Mouse, because we've been to Disneyland, and I was showing him a picture of Mickey Mouse, and he thought that was really funny to see Mickey Mouse on my phone. But immediately, when he finished, he knew what to do. And I thought, oh my God, he's 2! Yeah, and it's the world we live in, and he did know what to do. And to this day, if I get in trouble with my computer, I call somebody much younger than